Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Onion Soup, the show where we pull back the layers of metaphysics and reality to demystify spirituality. And today it is my honor to welcome Dr. Brian Tierney. How you doing today?
I'm doing great, Dexter. Good to see you.
Good seeing you as well. So I was honestly really excited to talk to you because you are a somatic psychologist. Tell us about that and exactly what do you do?
Yeah, it's basically a expert in body mind integration, working with the body. It's not just talking head therapy where it's just conceptual. Somatic therapy is very much about working with the body, working directly with the nervous system, doing process work to get the emotions, the kind of clogged emotions, unclogged, and really just setting free the whatever the blockages are.
So,
Chakras are it's an ancient framework, chakras. There's a way that there can be an overlap with some aspects of modern science where somatic psychology can be considered like a type of plumbing, getting the clogs out, as it were. And a lot of the clogs have to do with emotions, right? So I'm in the emotions business, I guess you could say.
so you talked about the chakras and each chakra possibly getting clogged or the connections between those chakras getting clogged and you going through being the plumber pulling out that clogging. Let's start with the first chakra at the bottom. Start with the root. What feelings and emotions are associated with the root chakra and how can somatic therapy help to alleviate that?
Okay, where the chakras overlap with science is in the so-called autonomic plexi. Plexi just means woven space of what? Woven space of the nerves. Okay, and in the case of the sacrum, we have the lumbosacral plexus, right? So what you have is a kind of integrated system with the lumbars and with the abdomen, but there is a distinctive center for the sacrum and the sacral area. So what we're talking about is basically all the muscles involved with pooping and peeing. You know what I mean? All the muscles that are involved with sexuality and things like that. And insofar as plumbing issues go, because actually Wilhelm Reich, one of the founders of modern Western somatic psychology, talked about how the legs are extensions of the sacral plexus and part of the sacral. I guess in the chakra language, it would be that the legs are an extension of the root chakra.
Mm.
Okay. And so the idea is that what emotions get trapped in the leg, excuse me, in the legs and in the pelvis, it's often going to be, it's a paradox. Okay. Because what Reich was talking about is that our longing to be a part of life, to be grounded in life. Okay. It's an interesting idea, right? Like longing to be grounded in life, okay, which is like a cosmic principle, but also our longing to establish our individuality. And these two can create kind of a traffic jam because they're opposite in a way. Our longing for kind of a cosmic connection, for desire, for orgasm. These can be, because orgasm can be a bit cosmic, right? If it's a good one. But also the legs establish our autonomy, establish our capacity to stand our ground. So if we don't, if our capacity to stand our ground is thwarted and prevented, one of the results can be rage.
Mm.
Okay. And because we're taught to bottle up rage and kind of like stuff it, where does it often go? Boom, right there in the pelvis. So rage is a quote unquote base emotion is often held right there in the pelvis, but also a deep, and this is one of the things that, families and societies thwart and repress is the deep, deep longing, deep, deep. Some people call it the God-sized yearning or the God-sized longing. Like this enormous longing in the pelvis just gets stuffed. Feelings of longing, feelings of rage, and the kind of thwarted impulses to establish our identity, stand our ground, and so on. Those often get locked up in the pelvis.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
So talking about the biological aspects of the chakra system, and we started talking about orgasm and sexuality. Uh, I guess my first question, I have 2 questions there. The first one, is this where the idea of tantric meditation comes from as we focus our sexual energies in order for manifestation? And then the other side of that is from a biological standpoint, what hormones are released? Is this when we have the release of oxytocin, dopamine, epinephrine? Is that what's going on?
Okay, so there are pelvic control centers in the core of the brain, okay, a region called the periaqueductal gray. This is in the core of the brain. And this is when you get really close to the fluids in the core of the brain, in structures like the periaqueductal gray, you have this really interesting bridge between two different languages in the brain, the chemical language of hormones and peptides like oxytocin, okay? And neurotransmitters in the synaptic language. So it's this region of the brain is like a really powerful bridge between chemical language and the language of wiring and electricity and stuff like that. And there's pelvic control centers there that are actually connected directly to the fifth, directly to the larynx and to the throat. So this is the connection, the direct connection between the pelvis and the throat and expression. So, yeah, absolutely. When we're feeling safe, safety would be crucial. Okay. During the moment of not just sexual embrace, but sensual touch, there's going to be some release of oxytocin in the core of the brain. Okay. When it comes to charging up the system, we have to, I like to think about bioelectricity because I'm science oriented, right? The best evidence that we have for a kind of biological life force energy insofar as science goes is charged ions in the body, like calcium ions, potassium ions, and stuff like that. And this is fundamental to long range cellular communication in the body. So I think it's not the really rich tantric traditions and magical traditions and all of that. I think they have a way of understanding that there's a way to build charge and then intentionally release it.
Mm.
Okay. And I'm somewhat agnostic when it comes to how much does that create a cause and effect with manifestation. But I do think that there's something very powerful and important about being able to charge up the body and to ride the waves of the bioenergy in the body and to be able to then focus that energy. I think it's really important. And hey, why not? Why wouldn't that be involved with manifestation? Because we need energy in order to go towards anything, right? So you need to build a charge in order to go anywhere. So it would make sense that it would have something to do with manifestation because you need the energy to do it.
Right. So when we're talking about this energy, and let's try to stick with biology because that's fun for me. I'm very science based. When we're talking about this energy, when we're looking up, let's go spiritual then science. I think that makes more sense. Let's go with the Kundalini because we're talking about the Kundalini rising when we're talking about energy rising up throughout the body. So from a physical perspective, would that be energy rising through the spinal cord through the CSF? Because there's nothing in the CSF really except for salts. And it's there for regulating body temperature, keeping the body in homeostasis. But at the top of our brains, inside, we have the pituitary and the pineal gland, which kinda come together with camera like this. Oh, there we go, like that. So, is there, like, an electric charge that goes through there, or am I just in my head about the way, let's say
For sure. The cerebrospinal fluid is still mystifying to the scientific community. It is very deep. It's important. It's hard to study in humans because you got to bore into the center of the spinal cord, or you at least have to go into the lumbar and do a lumbar puncture and stuff like that. But it involves a lot, the cerebrospinal fluid. Okay. And the mystery runs deep with it in terms of what's happening there. Neurotransmitters, neuropeptides, all of the big ticket chemicals and neurotransmitters circulate through that center of the spinal cord, which is fluid. That is cerebrospinal fluid that goes right up to the core of the brain. And in the layer of cells, okay, spinal cord cells, there's a little hair that projects into the fluids called the cilia. Okay. And these cilia have a coordinated beat pattern, like just bowing down to the ancient shamanic traditions, like with drumming and stuff like that, and breathing, is that there's a fundamental and very ancient rhythm in the core of the central nervous system that is driving those fluids in a coordinated flapping beat pattern. Okay. And what is that doing? That is moving the neurotransmitters through the entire core of the body. Again, the mystery still runs deep with this stuff, and just how important it is, because these aren't just motile cilia. There's a very refined sensory aspect to these cells. So they're actually listening to the chemical language that's circulating through the fluid core and then translating that chemical language into a synaptic language. Okay. It's just incredible. And then, so yes, there's absolutely a bioelectric current that goes through the core of the body. And serotonin is core to the functioning of these cilia. You know what I mean? Bioelectric charge is for real. It happens when our bodies are being created inside the womb. There's a bioelectric current that's moving from the anus to the anus to the mouth, not just at a whole body level, but on a cellular level. There's a very profound and deep embryological event that is a current that goes from the anus to the mouth. And that lines up with science. If you want to look at the details, it's called the epithelial mesenchymal transition, which has everything to do with cancer as well, because cancer has a lot to do with electrical currents as well.
Yeah. So when we're looking at the chakra system and we're trying to raise the energy through our bodies, and with somatic therapy, you're doing a lot of dancing, a lot of movement to get that energy flowing. So merging all of these together by raising the energy, doing the dancing, and getting the fluids to flow throughout the body. Every time it hits a chakra point as the energy rises, would you say that it's those nerve endings, those ganglion nerves that are possibly attached closely to the spinal cord that sends out an electrical current that in turn charges or balances that chakra point?
The chakras don't completely overlap with the biological sciences. There's some interesting overlap when it comes to just understanding that the core of our nervous system is segmented like a worm or a caterpillar. And the foundation of our central nervous system is that it has a segmental character. And as you probably know, there's a lot of chakra systems. It's not always seven. Sometimes it's nine. Sometimes it's even something like 52 or something like that. You seen this?
Mhm, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And I think where it does map onto biology is that, yeah, there is a segmented grid pattern. And for some reason in the human, the biological flow of electricity gets stuck in patterns of flow, patterns of neuromuscular firing along this segmental grid pattern. So then those segments prevent the biological energy from streaming through the body as a whole. There's many segments, and the chakra principle, I think, does overlap in some ways with that ancient grid pattern. And then to work when we're moving the body or we're breathing, breath work is a really important part of somatics. Trauma resolution is a really important part of somatics, and attending to the musculature of the face is a really important thing because we hold a lot in the musculature of the face. Like
Mm.
in my model, if we're talking chakra talk, then the fifth chakra is going to basically move from here all the way down to here. So the vocal apparatus is very important to release because this is one of the most common segments, the cranial nerves that are right here, to get us stuck. So it's a lot. So expression, getting the body humming, speaking, because our voices are often really wounded, right? So we got to get that. In somatics, we're really interested in expression, not just dancing, but vocal expression as well. How a person speaks, can they express the big ticket emotions, right? Sadness and anger and
So, as we're talking about the fifth chakra, the throat chakra in this area, and we're looking at the biological aspects of that, What does speaking, whether that be speaking your truth, singing, releasing pent up energy and emotions, uh, what does that have to do with the vagus nerve? Being that our throat is here and our vagus nerve sits in the back. So, how are those two related to each other? If at all?
Well, yeah. So the vagus nerve is connected to a really ancient segment of the brain. Okay. I say segment intentionally, right? And that segment sends down projections into the vocal cords.
Mm,
Okay. Also, the accessory nerve, which is close to that segment as well, governs the orienting response. So, when you intentionally vibrate and you intentionally use language to to treat a system therapeutically, then the vagus is pretty much always going to be lit up.
mm,
Okay. Vocal interventions have a direct connection with vagal processing. And then what that can do is that can induce a anti-inflammatory effect on the body as a whole. They're using vagal stimulators now. Have you heard of this piece? Or they surgically implant a vagal stimulator into the chest that sends signals into this portion of the vagus, right? And what they're finding is that treatment resistant depression and conditions like epilepsy and even autoimmune disorders can be treated because the vagus can, when it's stimulated, can bring us into this anti-inflammatory response, which is just really good for the body as a whole. And as with singing, singing happens on an exhale. You know what I mean? Talking happens on an exhale, right? So when we're singing, when we're expressing, we are by nature connecting with the exhale cycle of the breath, which is a lot about the parasympathetic system and how the system just goes into a state of quiescence and relaxation. That's all really important clinically.
interesting. When we start talking about the sympathetic and parasympathetic systems and going back into the ancient philosophies of the Inga, Pingala, and Shushamta, what do the Inga and the Pingala have to do with the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, and how does all that tie back into chakras?
Yeah, you have an active principle and a receptive principle. The sun and moon, this is the ancient mythology of the snaky dance.
Caduceus?
Exactly, the snaky dance around the center and probably even in the center. And yeah, that I think it's worthwhile to map it onto the sympathetic and parasympathetic system because they're reciprocal tension systems. Reciprocal tension systems. They're in a state of tension, dynamic tension, and there is a true kind of opposition between the two. Another mapping that we could do is with the glutamate system, the glutamate molecule and the GABA molecule. Glutamate is very excitatory.
Mhm.
Okay. It gets things going, whereas GABA is inhibitory. And so basically life just does this. It uses reciprocal tension.
Mhm.
So the yogis were right in that way. Reciprocal tension is a basic language of biology in the cosmos. It is just basic. And then symmetry principles are also in the cosmos and in bodies. We have a symmetrical axis embryologically and in our bodies as a whole. And there is something that does seem to be cosmic about it, that it's not just, oh, it's just biology or something. No, the cosmos does symmetry, but it also does the opposite as well. It also breaks symmetry up to create new forms and everything. But I think it's a good mapping to have. Oh, sympathetic, parasympathetic, but it's also the kind of basic binary of reciprocal tension in the universe. And then there's a middle place where kind of the binaries are like a fountainhead or something like that, where new reciprocal tensions are created, where old ones are resolved, and something of a mystical creative principle that's in the center there that both creates symmetries and then breaks them.
Mhm. So I wanna dive back into something you said earlier when we were talking about the segments of the body, and as we know, our spine is literally segmented, and in between each section of the spine is a my god, what is it called? It's like a sack of fluid. So
Yeah.
do you ever find that there are certain emotions that are trapped at different points in the spine?
Yeah, I think functionally how that shows up is just a lack of movement in different. If you get a person to move, this is a good simple thing to do at home, move in a snake-like fashion, just as a point of inquiry. And you can just tell, where am I not doing the snaky thing? Where does it feel like a bit stuck or whatever? And bring in some circular movements. And I think that's the best way to get a sense for it, is to get people to do undulatory movements to really just explore. And the best way to get the information is from the inside of the person. Like, I can notice from the outside, like, how are you moving or not moving? How's this segment going here? Which is the most common segment to get all stuck and traffic jams here. Movement is really, and also the movement of the breath. The diaphragm is anchored to the connective tissue that connects to the spinal column as well. So, like, when a person breathes, how are they moving? Are they moving? Is it fluid, or is there some sense of ratcheting or disjointed elements? And so, how can we work with the breath to bring some smoothness back into the segmental system so that everything's flowing together? Is one of the ideas in my work and in somatic psychology.
Interesting. So you say that a lot of times people have a disconnect with their throat and with their voice and speaking their truths. Why is that?
Because we're forced into boxes of expression. We're coerced by culture, by family, and sometimes with really good intentions. You know what I mean? Caring parents can do this too, but also there can be horrible abuse patterns. There can be marginalization, social oppression, all these big forces in culture directly impact how we express. And we get this message from a really young age, like what's okay to express, what's not okay to express. And then the patterns just set in. Sometimes you look at an old people, I'm sure. So there's this term that I like to use called RDF, resting disgust face.
Okay.
Ever looked at a kind of an older person who, like, just feels like they have crystallized in their face a kind of permanent expression of disgust?
Yeah.
It's just crystallized into the musculature of their face.
Mm.
And that had to happen at some early age where their parents brought disgust to them. And they just gradually over time, they practice it and they practiced it and they practice it and they practice it. And then just everything is about disgust now. So they just create disgust wherever they go because we're mirroring. Our nervous systems are constantly mirroring each other.
But how does one release that trauma and release that tension when it's so clearly embedded into their physiology?
I do sometimes, obviously, got to create a relationship first, but I'll have people do things like facial yoga.
Oh,
And just like just moving outside of the normal range of, or the habitual range of expression. And what's true for the face is true for the voice. I'll get people to, obviously, emotional release is a core aspect of the work. So when you start to release emotionally, different things start expressing out of your larynx, and you have different facial expressions. Now, this is one of the ways that people can get blocked as well, right? Hey, I'm not going to have any crying or anger around here. People sometimes, when that electrical current goes up and they start to cry, they'll put their hand in front of their face to smush it back down
mm,
so that the expression doesn't come into the facial muscles.
mm,
A similar thing with anger, right? It just gets stuffed and then held in the belly. And then you have something like IBS.
mm. Interesting. So fun fact, and I've never heard of, facial yoga before, but back when I was angry and depressed and decided I didn't wanna be that way anymore, I actually used to sit in the mirror and do that.
I
And
do like
try
crazy
to smile.
faces.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
yeah, and it now
yeah.
I smile all the time. I love life, and I'm very happy. When we're focusing a lot on the throat chakra and speaking, what about the others? We've talked about the root, we've talked about the throat. A lot of people don't seem to have as many issues with the sacral, solar plexus, or heart chakra.
Oh, no, we're a mess everywhere. The human body is just deeply segmented and split and fragmented. If we could smush us all into one body,
Mm,
and as a kind of diagnosis of how the human generally is doing this kind of plasma flow, we're a mess.
Mm.
in every single segment, all 79 of them or whatever.
Yeah. So how did we get here as a society, as humanity? How do we get from a place to where we were deeply in tune with nature to now we're so obsessed with the physical?
Well, I mean, honestly, I think it has to do with this double-sided axe of language. The innovation of language was like a miracle. Like the human innovation of symbolisms and symbolism in language was a remarkable mutation and innovation. But as soon as you invent language, you invent the other.
Mm.
Okay. The other who speaks another language. Okay. And not only that, as soon as you start representing nature, even if you have a really expansive representational style and really expansive poetic ritual practices and things like that, there's still a kind of a tendency to create a remove through labeling and representation.
Mm.
And that can have gradually over eons or whatever, it can gradually and gradually encourage us to other people, other the body,
Mm.
because then we have a representational system where and as we see in the biggest religious traditions, we see a huge split between the soul and the body, the mind and the body. And that's because of a representational system, essentially, if you think about it that way, right? You have a coding structure of meaning that gets and then the person lives in a castle in the sky. A lot of times it's called spiritual override, where then the body becomes denied and the body becomes denied. The body becomes other.
Mhm.
And then we have, as soon as you start to other people that speak another language and have a different body, then all sorts of atrocities can happen. Because if you're just living in a white castle or whatever, a mystical castle or something like that, and the body is over there and the bad other, then you have all this horrible systemic oppression. You have all, and it's essentially language that does it. In my book, I talk about how language has viral aspects and cancerous aspects.
Oh, interesting. Would this be the Somatic uh, visionary book? Is this
Visionary
Somatic?
Semantics.
Very
Visionary Semantics. Yep. Yep. That is my book and needs to be submitted by Thanksgiving.
Oh, wow.
So I have to say it is badass. It's probably, if we'll see what the editors do with it, but it's just a kind of, it's a very complex and I think wonderful merger of science and cosmos and like metaphysics. But because of my passion for science, whenever I go deep into metaphysics and cosmos and astrophysics, even, I'm coming back into the earth of how do we make that available clinically? What does that mean in terms of how to work with bodies and things like that? And trauma resolution work is a big piece of the book as well. So that's a very practical component.
Interesting. So as we talk about the cosmic body and we start talking about metaphysics and really how we bring that back into our physical reality, because I'm very interested in that as well. What would you say would be the best way to integrate our ethereal, cosmic, and physical bodies into?
There's forces in the universe and forces in the body that strip down, and there's forces in the universe that cohere and integrate and glue. And part of the trick is to figure out with collaboration what needs to get stripped down and what needs to get built up. There's so many social pressures that are getting us to glue and glue in various ways, and like how we report and how we present our identity and the things that we say and the memes and the codes of replication. And there's just so much structure. There's an incredible amount of structure, and you see it in word policing, you see it in intentioned mystical circles and in the new age, but what is actually a ton of structure, structured ways of making meaning, structured ways of talking, structured ways that are created in view of safety and trying to create safety and self-expression, but really what is just another coding structure
Mm.
that is a type of identity that actually thwarts the deconstruction elements. Radical deconstruction is part of the path in my books, radical deconstruction. And what that means to me is exploring the intensities of madness.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that? Exploring the intensities of madness.
Okay. So madness is different from insanity. One of the terms that I like, or one of the phrases that I like to tell students is the antidote to living an insane civilization is to ritualize madness.
Mm,
And what I mean by that is madness, when it has a container, of human beings that are caring and it's a safe container, madness is an uncontained space. Okay. It doesn't have a structure. It's pure intensity.
mm,
And it can't be contained by language. It can't be coded. It's different for every person in any given moment, and it's different for any collective expression of it. It's different. It's pure innovation. Like the writers that I like a lot like to talk about the two snakes this way, that it's chaos and order,
mm,
and that the two actually come together in the center, and that chaos and order they come together in a unified field. Order comes out of
mm,
chaos, returns to order. And madness is a way of breaking down all of the structures that are put upon us, okay, and creating innovative new ways of expressing and experiencing together. And this takes a specialized space, and it takes some teaching. It takes some creation of a safe container for it. But when people go there, some of them feel free for the first time in their life, just let loose and be like, go bonkers and throw a tantrum. A lot of us just did this as kids, right? It's not that complicated. It sounds really intense, right? Oh, madness. But you think about a kid tantruming, that's madness. You know what I mean? And also like how I play with my little girl sometimes. It looks like a schizophrenic play in a way, because she's a crocodile now. She's really a crocodile. Like she thinks that she's a crocodile and I'm a whale or something like that, or I'm a baboon. When I'm really, and in the world of play, it looks like madness, but it's actually not. It's just play and imagination. It's
mm.
intensity finding shapes.
Interesting. So allowing us as adults to re-enter the whimsicalness of a child. I
That's
love
it.
it. And then the other thing that you said that I really resonated with is how you alluded to the natural order of the universe being chaos, and how out of chaos we have order, but then that order needs to be broken down back into chaos. Regardless of whatever system we create, at some point that system will be obsolete and we have to grow. And it doesn't mean that it was bad. It just means that it's no longer the structure that we need for our society.
Well said, for sure. Yeah, yeah. That's the vibe. That's the vibe.
Yeah. Oh, that's crazy. Well, there's one more question I did have for you, and I'm really interested in your book, Visionary Semantics. So, what would be the driving point of your book? Like, there's just one element of it that you really want people to know about.
Language is that language is a paradox. Okay. That it puts us in a prison and it can set us free.
And it keeps bringing to mind the Tower of Babel, how at one
Yeah. Wow.
at one point we
Yeah,
had
yeah,
mother tongue, and then
yeah,
we split into these multitudes of languages, and instantly we had the other. But
for sure.
Dr. Tierney, I really am so grateful for you coming on, and we only have a few minutes left. Is there anything that you'd like to leave the audience before we go?
Yeah, check out my Instagram. I'm active on Instagram, and my handle is hashtag the somatic doctor. Okay, doctor spelled out, and that's my website too. So that's my brand. Everybody got to have a brand, right? So it's somaticdoctor.com. And then I got a podcast going on called The Boundless Body.
Mm.
So just search Boundless Body, Dr. Brian Tierney, and you'll find it. Um, so yeah, that's what I'm up to. You can find me that way. Eventually I'll be doing intakes to teach visionary somatics practitioners, and that's in the pipeline as well. So I'm going to train people to go out there and be weird and wonderful.
Wow, that's wonderful. I'll be one of those people. I love
Awesome. Oh my God, I'd like it. I'd like it.
But thank you again, Dr.
Yeah.
Tierney, for coming on, and thank you all for tuning in to this episode of Plain Soup. I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Dexter.